Can you hear me? Good. Yay. We're working. Okay, and I have a clicker. So I know. I have to point it. What do I point it at? Oh, yes, I have to turn the clicker on. Woohoo! Great. Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. Isn't it good to be here on a Sunday? I mean, it's not normal, but we're on our way, right? So is there something going on in your life right now where you feel desperate? A situation where you've exhausted your resources, you've tried everything you can think of, and you're out of options. Webster's dictionary actually gives us 5 definitions for desperate. The first definition is having lost hope or having no ground for hope. Have you lost hope that a situation or a relationship could change? The second one is being moved by despair. Has your confidence and any sense of optimism gone out the window? The third one is employing extreme measures in an attempt to escape defeat or frustration. Have you worked and worried and tried to manipulate to the absolute max to try and bring about the result that you want? Have you tried every conventional and maybe even unconventional approach? And the fourth one is suffering extreme need or anxiety. Maybe your desperation's leaving you feeling lost or empty or scared. And then the last one is involving extreme danger or possible disaster. Are you maybe in a situation where things could easily go south at any moment? Desperate's kind of a strong word, but I think most of us probably have at least one area where we feel a little bit desperate, and maybe you do have something bigger going on in your life where you feel out of control and at the end of your rope. You don't need to manufacture something. If you're not in any kind of desperate situation now, you can probably think of a time when you were. And I don't want to put ideas in your head, and perhaps something's already come to mind, but you could be desperate financially. You might be wondering how you'll make ends meet. Maybe you've lost income because of COVID-19. Maybe you've got extra expenses. Perhaps you're wondering if you'll ever find a job or if you'll ever be able to retire. Maybe you're desperate for a relationship to change, to become healthier, kinder, maybe less loaded. Could be desperate for your health. Perhaps you've tried every kind of test and treatment, and you've even been to a few questionable medical practitioners, but you're still in pain or you're still sick. Maybe you're desperate for someone that you know to let Jesus transform their life because they don't know him, they don't want to know him, and maybe their life's falling apart because of their lifestyle. And you've tried talking to them, but they really don't want to hear it. You could be desperate to get free of a habit or an addiction. You could be desperate to get married or to get pregnant. Singleness is not always a calling, and infertility just hurts. You could be desperate, especially right now, for normal social interaction, if we even remember what that is. All the isolation and the weirdness of the masks. You all have lovely masks on. You look really good in your mask, by the way. But hey, it's weird, isn't it? And all that social distancing, it starts to get to you after a while. You might be desperate for a break, not being able to travel, all the cancellations, the kids can't go to school and daycare and summer camps, that week off you normally get in the summer where they go have fun and you have fun. Sometimes that day-to-day just seems never-ending. Perhaps there's something else that comes to mind. Where are you desperate? And then what do you do when you're desperate? Some of us do frantic research, right? Google becomes our best friend. There has to be an answer out there in cyberspace somewhere. If I just look at enough websites, I'll find it, right? Perhaps you work extra hard in the areas of your life that aren't falling apart just to maintain some kind of feeling of control. Some of us distract ourselves by staying busy with work projects. We find fun things to do, or perhaps just drinking or numbing out on Netflix to keep your mind off your urgent need. You may turn inward, find yourself sinking into depression. You might call friends and ask for advice or help or prayer. So today, we're going to read about 2 people who were desperate. It's the next section in our journey through the Gospel of Luke, and these 2 people came to Jesus because they had nowhere else to turn. They tried everything, nothing else was working for them, and in their desperation, they turned to Jesus. So let's see what happened. We're going to read Luke 8, 40 to 56, and I've asked my friend Tracy to come read it. Tracy's one of our eldest wives. She's also part of the kids ministry team. She teaches when we have a kids ministry. And while we haven't had a kids ministry, she and Sarah have been repainting the nursery, giving it a facelift and the bathroom, and it was kind of, well, and it was in desperate need of a change, wasn't it? So it's very appropriate for this morning. So anyway, Tracy's going to read for us this morning. And we'll have it up on screen.
I wanted to encourage everybody to maybe close your eyes and kind of picture that you're a part of this scene, because sometimes, especially if we're familiar with the stories, we can just kind of, it's like Cinderella and it never happened. But these things did happen. It's recordings of events, historical events. And so kind of picture yourself in this while I read this. Now, when Jesus returned, the crowd welcomed him, for they were all waiting for him. And there came a man named Jairus, who was a ruler of the synagogue. And falling at Jesus' feet, he implored him to come to his house, for he had an only daughter, about 12 years of age, and she was dying. As Jesus went, the people pressed around him. And there was a woman who had had a discharge of blood for 12 years. And though she had spent all her living on physicians, she could not be healed by anyone. She came up behind him and touched the fringe of his garment, and immediately her discharge of blood ceased. And Jesus said, "Who was it that touched me?" When all denied it, Peter said, "Master, the crowds surround you and are pressing in on you." But Jesus said, "Someone touched me, for I perceive that power has gone out from me." And when the woman saw that she was not hidden, she came trembling and falling down before him, declared in the presence of all the people why she had touched him, and how she had been immediately healed. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." While he was still speaking, someone from the ruler's house came and said, "Your daughter is dead. Do not trouble the teacher anymore." But Jesus, on hearing this, answered him, "Do not fear, only believe, and she will be well." And when he came to the house, he allowed no one to enter with him except Peter and John and James, and the father and mother of the child. And all were weeping and mourning for her. But he said, "Do not weep, for she is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him, knowing that she was dead. But taking her by the hand, he called, saying, "Child, arise." And her spirit returned, and she got up at once. And he directed that something should be given to her to eat. And her parents were amazed, but he charged them to tell no one what had happened.
Thank you, Tracy. So have you heard these two kind of intertwined stories before? Perhaps you're hearing them for the first time. It's kind of a busy day in the life of Jesus. Perhaps they're very familiar to you. You know, I have heard these stories. I remember hearing them as a child in Sunday school. I've listened to sermons on them. I've done Bible studies on them. But as I've studied them over the last couple of weeks, they've taken on fresh life for me. So, you know, especially in light of this paradigm shift series that we're in, where we're getting to know Jesus and letting him reshape our lives and attitudes, these stories have just become all the more real. These are real life encounters that Jesus had with real people. And perhaps they're people that we can relate to. Perhaps in seeing how these people encountered Jesus, we can encounter him in a new way ourselves. So we've got two people, right? Two situations. Lots of contrasts, but they're both absolutely desperate. Jairus was a respected man in his Jewish community. A synagogue ruler was kind of like an elder or a deacon. We have elders and deacons in our church. We call our deacons ministry leaders, if you're looking for a parallel. So he was the guy who organized the weekend service in the synagogue, you know, who was going to read, who was going to teach, who was going to lead worship, who would handle the live stream and get the sermon up on YouTube, who's going to make the coffee, all that kind of stuff, right? So Jairus was known by name, by everyone. He was a visible figure in town. The woman had no name. Well, I'm sure she had a name, but we don't get to know her name, right? She obviously wasn't particularly important in the way that society considered importance. She really shouldn't even have been out in public because according to Old Testament law, women were considered unclean if they were bleeding, and anybody who touched her would be considered ritually unclean. So being unclean meant that you couldn't go to the synagogue, temple, or to worship. You had to go through various rituals to make you so-called clean again. And devout Jewish men actually avoid ever touching women other than their wives, just in case they were bleeding. And yes, guys, we're talking about periods here. And I know we don't like talking about this stuff in church. Passages that talk about menstrual issues are about as high on the awkwardness scale as ones that talk about circumcision, right? They're our favorites. We'd rather not think about it, let alone talk about it. But sorry, here it is in the Bible. This is part of life. So anyway, bleeding made her unclean, and it made anyone who touched her unclean. So unlike Jairus, who went to synagogue worship every week, he organized it, she probably hadn't even been able to attend worship for 12 years. She would have been almost like a leper in that society, not because she was medically unclean or, contagious, but because she was ritually unclean for religious reasons. And that's a hard life. So Jairus had enjoyed about 12 years of family life together with his daughter. Do we have any 12-year-olds here this morning? We have a 12-year-old. Yay! Welcome, 12-year-old. Several families in this church do have girls about that age. They may have their moments, but they're a real source of joy, aren't they? Girls bring a lot of life and personality and creativity to the home. And boys are a great source of joy too. We're not dissing you boys. The story this morning just happens to be about a girl. But I remember taking our daughter Selena to register for 7th grade, so she would have been 12 then, and I was just thinking how full of life she was. She'd been asked by one of the teachers to help, and she was just full of confidence at that age. She had a sassy new haircut, she kind of found her own sense of style, she was loving life, and it was just a kind of a really cool time in her life, At that age, they're not quite an adult yet, but they're more than a child. And you begin to see their personality emerge and get a sense of who God made them to be. And you've got all this hope for who they're going to be and who they're going to become, their future. So Jairus had 12 years of joy. The woman had endured 12 years of suffering. She'd been looking for solutions to her bleeding problem, trying all kinds of doctors. We can only imagine what kind of treatments she had to put up with in the 1st century AD. She'd used up all her resources, and the version of this story in Mark's Gospel actually tells us that her problem had got worse, not better. So think about it. That means if the story were to happen today, she'd been dealing with anemia and social and religious isolation since 2008. Think of everything that's happened in your life since 2008. That's a long time. Jairus' daughter was sick. She was really sick. In fact, she was dying. Jairus' family joy was about to crumble. And we don't know what she was sick with. We don't know what had happened. We can only assume that the doctors had nothing more to offer and that the prayers of the religious leaders hadn't been answered, because we have to assume Jairus would have asked them to come and pray. Jesus was an itinerant teacher. He wasn't part of the respected religious establishment where Jairus worked. And Jesus was already unpopular with the religious leaders who saw him as kind of threatening the status quo of this system. They had the prestige and the control, and they wanted things to stay as they were. So Jairus may even have been risking his job by asking Jesus for help. So it took some serious humility for Jairus to approach this unconventional teacher and this miracle worker. And the equivalent would probably be different for all of us. It sort of depends on your faith background and your preferences. If you have a traditional background, then it might take humility to ask for help from a faith healer or a TV evangelist. If you have a more charismatic background, it might be hard to seek out a Catholic or other kind of mainline priest for help. And if you have no background at all, asking anyone non-medical to come and heal your dying child might feel humbling and even risky. But Jairus was desperate. This respected man just fell at Jesus' feet. He put himself totally at his mercy, and he implored him to come to his house. This wasn't just a casual request. This was a frantic appeal. Please, Jesus, please come heal my daughter. So the woman took a huge risk working her way through the crowd to approach Jesus from behind. If anyone knew her problem and saw her, she would be in serious trouble for exposing others to her uncleanness. So she wanted to keep it on the down low, just touch the edge of his cloak, stay low to the ground so nobody would notice her in the crowd. And maybe you've seen pictures. You know, at that time in the ancient Near East, Jesus would have been wearing some kind of robe, flowy robe. So she wouldn't attempt to disgrace him by actually touching his body, just the hem, just the very edge of his clothes. She couldn't hope for more, but in her desperation, she just hoped that that would be enough. So how does Jesus respond to these two people's desperation? How do you expect Jesus to respond to you when you're desperate? I want you to think about this for a minute, because how you expect Jesus to respond really, really matters. Because if you expect Jesus to blow you off or make light of your concern, because, other people have much bigger problems than you do. So, have some perspective here. Or if you expect him to rub your nose in it and shame you for getting yourself into a mess, maybe again. Or if you expect him to use your circumstances to teach you a lesson, which, yes, Jesus does use circumstances to teach us things, but not with that wagging finger, I told you so kind of attitude. Or if you expect him to be angry with you or disappointed in you, then you're not very likely to bring your desperate need to Jesus, are you? Who needs that? You get more support from Google and you get more sympathy from a bartender. So we need to take a good look at how Jesus responded, because how Jesus responded to them is how we can expect Jesus to respond to us. Hebrews 13:8 tells us, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So the same Jesus who helped these two people that we've just read about with their very real needs will help you with your real needs too. So I want to take a look at how we can expect Jesus to respond to us. And I think the first thing that we need to know when we go to Jesus is not formulaic. If we're looking for universal principles to extract from these stories and apply to our lives, we could easily get frustrated. There is no formula for how Jesus will respond to people. Ryan put it really well last week when he said that God is not a cosmic vending machine. I should have asked him for his slide because it was really fun. But anyway, we don't insert this specific prayer and go through this specific ritual to get this outcome and this healing. He's a person we relate to. He's not an appliance that we use. We see this all through the gospel stories, but these two vignettes are just absolutely classic in showing us this. There's so many contrasts and so many differences. So Jesus heals the woman instantly, right? But he takes time and delays going with Jairus to the point where his daughter died. And the woman received her healing passively, without Jesus even saying anything. She didn't even ask Jesus. She just touched him and the power went out and she just received the healing, right? Restored her to health. But Jesus responded to Jairus' request by going with him and actively touching and speaking healing over his daughter, resurrection over his daughter. Jesus commended the woman for her faith, whereas he needed to instruct Jairus to choose faith over fear. Jesus called the woman out of hiding and made her healing public, but he told Jairus and his wife not to tell anybody how he brought their daughter back to life. And you have to wonder about that one, don't you? Clearly she was dead. In that culture, they had professional mourners, people who would come to cry and weep and lament with the family when someone died. And they'd already gathered. They're in full wailing swing by the time that Jesus gets there. So how could her parents keep quiet the fact that she's alive now? She was dead, now she's alive. Wouldn't people notice? The funeral's off, you can all go home, but we're not going to tell you why. Jesus probably, we can't really probably fully understand it, but he probably wanted people to follow him, not his miracles. He wanted them to know and love and learn from him, not the big wow factor, the big show. But my point here is that Jesus is predictably unpredictable. If you like rules and principles and manuals, that could be difficult because you just can't fit Jesus into a mold. That there are some principles, yes. We walk through life with Jesus, we get to know him, we obey his word, and yes, he will bless you. But you cannot predict or dictate exactly what that blessing will look like. There's no formula for that. The second thing is that Jesus is 100% present to each person and each situation. Jairus asks him to go with him, and he goes. He's physically there. The woman sneaks up, and he feels power go out of him, and he takes time to address her personally. He doesn't just leave her as a passive and impersonal recipient of healing. He's present to her needs even beyond the physical healing, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. When Jairus is told that his daughter's dead, he addresses the need of the moment and encourages him to have faith. And at the house, he attends personally to the girl and her parents, with just the 3 disciples present. And he gives this very public figure a moment of privacy for this tender thing that's going to happen. He shows them personally the extent of his power, not just to heal, but even to resurrect life. You know, Jesus could have got off the boat. Remember, he'd just come back across the lake from the Gerasenes, where he'd healed the demoniac. He could have got off the boat, waved his hand, looked to heaven, and he could have healed Jairus' daughter and the woman who was bleeding and everyone else in the crowd who had an ailment, just like that, right? But he didn't have to interact with any of them. But that's not Jesus' style, is it? He wasn't just working a crowd and showing off. He chose to be present and to the personal and unique needs of each person who had an encounter with him. And you can expect him to be present and uniquely involved with your needs too. Next thing that we need to know about Jesus is he is not in a hurry. He was busy. He was surrounded by a lot of people with a lot of needs. He had a huge task. He had come to show us and teach us what God is like, right? Talk about pressure. The crowds and even his disciples were pretty slow on the uptake. They really didn't get the hang of what he was talking about very quickly. He had his work cut out in showing what God was really like. And everyone wanted healing. Well, of course, if there's someone in town who can heal every disease and every ailment and disability, of course, crowds are going to come. And who doesn't want to get rid of their pain and their physical problems? And people loved his miracles. A crowd of 5,000 people and no caterer? Well, no problem. One lunch is plenty for everyone when Jesus is around, right? And that's a spoiler alert because that story is coming up very soon in Luke. Jesus' days were really full, but he was never in a hurry. He was never rushed. He was always patient, and he took time with each person. Whoever was in front of him had his full attention in that moment. He wasn't irritated or stressed by how huge the task was. He took one day at a time and one person at a time. And he was always open to interruptions when people had a need. He's going with Jairus, but this woman had a need. So he stops and attends to her and then goes back to Jairus. And Jesus is always available when you need him to. He isn't preoccupied with more important concerns. He isn't overwhelmed by the number of people who need him. He's not stressed out and irritated that these humans get themselves into so much trouble. He isn't surprised or caught off guard when we experience crises, whether they're personal crises or a pandemic. He's available, he's compassionate, he's never too busy to spend time with you and to be with you and to help you. We also need to know that Jesus speaks life into our faith. You know, Jesus talked to both of these people about faith. The woman had faith, but Jesus knew she needed to be commended for it. It needed to be spoken out loud. She probably mostly felt her desperation. Perhaps she wasn't even aware that behind that desperation was faith, that in spite of the failure of everything else that she tried, Jesus could heal her. If you come to Jesus in faith, even imperfect faith, even small faith, you can expect him to encourage you and commend you because you're putting your faith in the right place. Jairus needed more faith. He had faith that perhaps Jesus could heal his daughter, but he didn't have faith that he could bring her back to life after she died. Jesus told Jairus, "Do not fear, only believe, and she will be well." You know, it's natural to feel fear when you get bad news, isn't it? It can crash over you like a wave. And for Jairus, I'm sure it was the fear of a future without his daughter in the family, fear of pain, loneliness. Are people going to say hurtful things? How will my wife handle the loss? Death seems so final. There's no room for faith, right? Once somebody dies. But Jesus wanted him to know that nothing is ever final. Nothing is beyond his reach and his power to act, even death. And we can expect that Jesus might just do things that, for us, that feel impossible. He can heal relationships that seem too broken to mend. He can just blow our expectations out of the water. He can provide for us when our resources are depleted. He can breathe life into dreams that we gave up on long ago. Ephesians 3:20 tells us that he is able to do far more abundantly than all we ask or think. Jesus isn't limited by our expectations, what we think is reasonable, or the solutions that we can think up. He can't be contained in any of the boxes that we might want to put him in. So Jesus encourages us to have faith that he could do absolutely anything at any moment. Has he ever surprised you? I hope so. If not, I know he will at some point. And then Jesus offers hope of more. You know, one of the characteristics of being desperate is that we can begin to lose hope. That was one of the definitions at the beginning. We start out full of hope that this solution will fix our problem or this treatment will heal us. But after a while, when plan A doesn't work, and plan B doesn't work, and plan C doesn't work, and plans D, E, F, and G don't work, it's easy to believe there is no solution and there is no hope. So Jesus instills a sense of hope by the way that he responds to these desperate people. He did fix their problems in these stories. He stopped the woman's bleeding and he brought Jairus' daughter back to life and health. But he also did more. I love that Jesus didn't let the woman get away with just physical healing. He knew she had another significant need. Yes, she needed healing. She needed to be physically healthy. She needed to be ceremonially clean so she could participate fully in the life of the community in the synagogue. But after a life of living in the shadows, living as an unclean person, she needed to be brought out of hiding. And he said some really specific and important things to her that she needed to hear. He called her daughter. An unclean person didn't belong in society, but he called her a name that is one of the clearest signs of belonging. He called her family, a person of value to him. He assured her that she was worthy of relationship with him and in the community. And maybe she felt that her suffering was her fault because of her sin or because she wasn't worthy of healing. We can start to feel that when we've suffered with something for a long time. Jesus publicly commended her for her faith and even encouraged her that she'd been healed because of her faith. Now, does that mean that all you need to be healed is to have enough faith? Well, no, remember, Jesus isn't formulaic. He also told her to go in peace. After 12 years of desperate turmoil, he gave her permission. He actually instructed her to enjoy the peace of being well and clean. And Jesus did more for Jairus too. He came asking for healing for a sick child, but he received resurrection of a dead child. He had faith that Jesus could restore her health while she was still breathing, but death was final. It was beyond hope of reversal. But Jesus showed Jairus there's always hope. Nothing is beyond his reach, even death. With Jesus, there's always hope. He can do anything at any moment. He's absolutely motivated by unselfish love for us. He absolutely knows what's best for us in any situation, and he has absolute power to move on our behalf. So I do need to talk here a little bit about healing and resurrection, because everyone that Jesus tried to heal was healed, right? And everyone that Jesus tried to resurrect came back to life. He didn't heal everyone and he didn't resurrect everyone, but he was never unsuccessful in those that he ministered to. And we don't necessarily always see that today, do we? Sometimes we pray for healing, and sometimes people are healed, sometimes quite miraculously, but not always. We've prayed for a lot of people at New Crossing Church. Some have received healing, and others haven't. So perhaps you've even heard stories of people being resurrected from the dead, that there are still some valid reports that it does still sometimes happen, but it's very rare. And by the way, that everyone that Jesus resurrected did still die. Our ultimate hope, of course, is the eternal resurrection that Jesus gives to those who follow him after our lives on earth here end. But why is healing and resurrection so rare today, or relatively rare? And honestly, I don't know. I wish I had a nice and tidy answer for you, and I don't. Genuine healing does seem to be more common in developing nations. Perhaps people are more desperate. You know, several years ago, I was talking to a pastor's wife. She'd been here for a couple of years from an African nation, and I wish I could remember which one, but I can't. It was a while ago. But I was asking her what she missed about her country, and she said, ministry. And I thought, well, that's odd, because you're in ministry here. But what she said was that people there had so few resources that when something happened, you know, when a truck or a bicycle broke, or when somebody was sick, or when something was stolen from them, or when there was no rain, they would come for prayer. And she said that they saw so many miracles. They saw God do amazing things because people were desperate. They had nowhere else to turn. They turned to God, and he moved. I don't think that's the whole answer, but it is part of it. We rely on so many things. And many of them are God's gift to us. You know, we have great medical care. We have insurance. We have disability and welfare parents. We've got self-help books. And, of course, we have Google. We have so many places to turn for help. And I do believe that these amazing resources we have are gifts from God. He gave us the ability to research and understand and come up with treatments and creative ideas. But then so often the last person that we turn to is God. Sometimes we don't receive from God because we don't ask. That's James 4:2. But I also know some of you have asked, especially for healing. Some of you have received it, and some of you haven't. I don't know why. I just know Jesus isn't formulaic. We do need to keep asking for healing because God does still sometimes heal miraculously. But when he doesn't, he is still the same Jesus that we see in these stories. When you bring your desperate need to Jesus, you can be confident that he will be personal to you and he will be present to your unique needs. He's never too busy for you. He's never too rushed or hurried to give you his full attention and absolutely be with you. He will treat you as a valued son or daughter. Whatever you've done or not done, you're his precious child, and he will treat you as such. He will offer you peace. Whatever storm you're in, and even if that storm is still raging, he can help you go in peace because he is in control. You remember the story of him calming the wind and the waves a couple weeks ago? Just being with Jesus is cause for peace. He can handle anything. And he'll fan into flame even your smallest spark of faith and encourage you to have bigger faith. He will surprise you with more. Not the more you thought you wanted, but always more of him. He'll surprise you with blessings beyond or maybe even very different from what you might have hoped or dreamed to ask for. And you might notice that faith and hope are very intertwined, aren't they? Jesus wants to have faith that he can do anything and hope that he will. In a little bit, we are going to take communion this morning. And if you have a desperate need right now, you can bring that need. Bring it to Jesus and trust that as you take the bread and the cup, representing his body and his blood, and eat and drink them, you're inviting him into your life. You're imploring him to help you, just like Jairus did. And if you want to fall to your knees like Jairus, get low to the ground like the woman as we take communion, feel free to do that. Or you may remember a time where you were desperate in the past. Perhaps you didn't even notice at the time, but now you look back and you can see that Jesus totally came through for you, maybe in some unexpected way. Perhaps you were desperate for him to heal a relationship, and in the process, he healed you of your pride. Perhaps you were desperate for him to provide, and in the process, he gave you surprising contentment. Perhaps you were desperate for a break, and he gave you unexpected endurance and patience. Maybe you were desperate for physical healing, and in the process, he taught you to rely on his strength rather than your own. So as you take communion, thank him for how he's helped you in a time of desperate need, and may the memory of that time increase your faith and hope that he will be there for you again any time that you're desperate. Jesus wants you to come to him with your needs. He wants you to bring your desperation to him. He wants to meet you in all the places that are beyond your control, where your solutions are exhausting you and where you're tempted to lose hope. Come to him, ask him for what you need, and have faith and hope that he will come through for you. The same Jesus who was present and available and powerful in Jairus' family and in the life of this bleeding woman will be present and available and powerful in your life too. So I want to close with Hebrews 4:16. Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, Jesus' throne. Let us with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of desperate need, and especially in our time of desperate need. Let's pray. And if the worship team wants to come up, and Craig wants to come up to do communion. God, thank you that you are with us. God, I just want to ask you to forgive us for the times that we've assumed that you wouldn't want to meet with us, that we have a desperate need and we think we need to fix it ourselves before we come to you. Forgive us, Lord. And God, I pray that this morning we will believe you are who you have shown yourself to be in these stories, and that we will have confidence to come to you. God, we bring you our desperate needs. We name our desperate needs before you, and we remember the places where we've been in need. And God, thank you that you will meet us in those needs. Thank you that you are for us and with us. And God, help us believe that and trust that and rely on you and bring everything to you. And God, I pray that we will have many stories of how you've come through for us in unexpected ways, because that's who you are. Help us to notice the ways that you come through for us, and help us to celebrate and worship you. In Jesus' name.